Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, listeners, friends and colleagues. Here we are again, another Saturday show, and happy to be on a Saturday, in fact. So we're getting back into normal mode now, Stephen. So lovely to see you.
Good morning, Chris.
You too, Chris. Yeah, thank you. Little bit of delayed reaction there.
Top of the morning to you there. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I know you're in a different location this week, so maybe the internet was a little bit delayed there. That was why I was slow to respond.
All the way from Chichester. Yep. Listen, lovely to see you wearing your patriotic colours today.
Thank you. Yeah.
And I think on that we should start with perhaps Boris and his boys growing a set of balls and sorting themselves out, because it's an absolute embarrassment what's going on now with these corridors and the differences even within the United Kingdom. An absolute travesty, and it's doing nothing for confidence nor for supporting the aviation industry.
Yeah, I totally agree, Chris. This is now, we can't sort of plead ignorance anymore. The government can't plead ignorance, sort of saying, well, we're new at this, we haven't done this before. Actually, there exists some logic behind the scenes, I assume, in terms of how to manage these air corridors and how to measure risk profile. But it appears that's all been thrown out the window, because, of course, there are other forces at play. So, I mean, the separatists north of the border, have been trying always to defend their own actions as a result of their starting point being a few weeks delayed behind England. That's how Nicola justified the actions of the Scottish government previously. I think in Wales there's just some politics at play. With a Labour national government there, trying to exert some authority over their own dealings, and of course in Westminster, the Transport Secretary is saying, "Well, it ain't me, Gov. I'm not responsible for devolved policy." So, well, you bloody well should be if you're not. So herein lies some of the challenges with devolved government, and somebody always told me that too much democracy is not always a good thing. In this instance, what it should probably have taken is some legislation, emergency legislation or otherwise, to crack down on the split that as one United Kingdom is just showing actually, why these different parties and different leaders can't be political bedfellows, but more critically, what that's doing is damaging the return of air travel, damaging the confidence of the consumer, damaging the ability for airlines and travellers to plan. They're saying, well, okay, I'm a Scottish citizen. I flew out of Glasgow to Spain, for example. Spain now comes back into quarantine requirements. Do I now, instead of flying into Glasgow, I'm going to fly into Newcastle?
Yeah.
And I'm going to drive the 2 hours over the border. What does that mean then?
Yeah.
So
even that, Stephen, right? Okay, because the thing that I'm really mad at, and I had about 10 or 12 contacts all talking about this particular issue. Anybody who talks to me, family, friends, colleagues, anybody, and I'm pretty good at giving my opinion, as you know. And I say, look, if it's a guideline, if it's a rule, if it's a law, follow it. And unfortunately, I've had so many people now contact me who came back from Spain and a few other places, and they went directly into the self-quarantine for 2 weeks. Not a single contact, not a single message on their phone, not a single ad hoc telephone call just to make sure that they were quarantined. I just understand. How can you impose something and have no controls on it? It's absolutely toothless. And what you said there about having some, whether or not people should be given a choice. We've been doing the ACHL digital event, and we've had carriers and airlines, everybody, and we've had a little bit of a discussion between whether or not too many people like to use the tickling duster stick or the carrot and stick. And I'm now all for the common sense baseball bat. People should be told this is what's going to happen. If this hits a certain level, this is what you're going to expect. So everybody understands. But all this freedom of choice is terrible. And I was talking to some of the American carriers, and they were saying how the physical abuse and conflicts have gone through the roof now because there's so much open discussion and open debate as to what one person wants against another. It's ridiculous.
I agree, Chris. I think the question that one should really ask is quarantine the right control measure?
Yeah, and no, it's not.
So, and I don't think it is either. I think blanket bans or blanket quarantine restrictions is sort of, you know, akin to the sledgehammer and walnut analogy. I think what would be much more prescient is a far better testing, you know, test, trace, contact kind of regime that we were told in the UK was going to be world beating or world leading, I think, with the phrase used by the Prime Minister and his Secretary of State for Health and Social Care, Matt Hancock. Actually, I don't know much about it because I haven't seen much about it since it was launched on the world stage, and then it all went sort of into a quiet whimper. So I don't think that exists. I think there are some governments, not just in the UK, but the Scottish government and the Welsh government, I think, are taking advantage of their ability to enforce their own restrictions without consensus across all four nations of the United Kingdom. But exactly the same thing, Chris, is happening in a federated country like Australia. You know, where the states of WA and Queensland are digging their heels and saying, you know, West knows best, as in the Australian Premier knows best, Mark McGowan, and we'll keep this closed. We'll keep our borders closed. How dare you ask me to open my border? And we're very proud to have 0 cases for 140 days. Yeah. 0 cases for 140 days, Chris. Yet in Canberra or in Sydney, they're announcing, and Victoria, they're announcing each case by the day. 6 cases, 10 cases, 12, one day. Yeah. As sad as that is, there were 70 deaths yesterday from cancer. You know, in Malaysia, there are 7,500 deaths on the road every year. We don't announce every single one every day. So this has become quite excessive. It's become quite negative. This need for daily briefings and press conferences just gets on my goat. All it does is continually, you know, create. I don't watch them anymore. I've switched off. The only thing I do is read the paper, and I can choose which publications to read and which are bob on. Just on testing, I have to give the Daily Mail a big up. Their campaign this week on test for travel. I have to say there were a number of airline CEOs who publicly commented suggesting that the Daily Mail wouldn't have ordinarily been their paper of choice, Chris. The Daily Mail happens to be one of the papers that I do choose to read. But I'll leave that there for people to read their own interpretation.
Yeah, we know that. Yeah, boys in blue.
But look, the boys in blue. Yes, I think it might be printed by the Cabinet Office. I'm not sure. But look, serious point here is that the Daily Mail and actually Telegraph, the Daily Telegraph, both of the papers of the government, colours of the government, have been very active now and proactive in trying to get some momentum behind a test for travel campaign, supported by excuse me, supported by the likes of IAG, supported by Heathrow Airport and a number of other carriers and UK travel groups, also the Future of Aviation group getting right behind it. So I think when these issues come into the public sphere and are pretty vocal, as they were about, for example, Rule Britannia, Land of Hope and Glory, which was really a nonsense issue.
Goodness me!
Really, I mean, just a nonsense. I mean, I'm using that, Chris, as a nonsense issue, just some white noise. But you can see the power that was generated from the public sort of spirit of that campaign. I just hope the same kind of effort is made here, and that it really translates into action from government, but also action from the carriers who need to be, you know, some are more vocal than others. You know, I wonder, for example, why in some of the states in Australia where they've got these travel lockdowns still existing, that the trade unions haven't been very vocal to their premiers and their state governments about the impact on travel and aviation, etc. The politics, unions, media, all kind of go hand in hand in some way there, and each have got a part to play. The part that they need to play is let's rehabilitate our industry, let's get on with it, and let's get people traveling and get our economy working for us again.
100%. And this business now about how people can be influenced and clouded by all this media and negativity, and it's just getting so depressing. People need to start up talking now. And I had a discussion with Janet Wallace and Jessica Tyler from Air Canada and American yesterday or the day before. So positive, even with challenging times ahead. You know, and they were so collaborative, so consistent with their approaches. I don't understand why some of the governments are not listening to some of the experts. And it's not just because they're favouring that particular side of the industry or their own industry, but they actually know what they're talking about. And these people are just coming out and they're hanging their arguments on emotions and public opinion and fear. That's where it goes wrong, Steve. And it really is now getting to the one. And the issue, I can't remember who said it, Derek Provins, I think, CEO, AGS Airports. And he was just explaining how damaging now things are because of a lack of clarity and a lack of focus. And then you look at what's happening with Qantas, with Virgin. I know you're on top of that. I mean, it's such a crying shame now that people are doing so much and people are containing so much and they're bringing so much hygiene now into everyday aviation practices. People should start to appreciate it, but they need to have clarity and they need to have consistency from airport to airport and country to country. It does not make sense for the common person to be thinking, well, why is this company doing this? Why is this airport doing that? And why can't these governments come together? The World Health Organization, with its absolute cock up with the masks from the beginning, and fair play to Cargo Lux for the paint job they've done on their freighter with the mask on. Fantastic. Yeah, brilliant, absolutely superb. But what a cock up. And now there's been so many reversals. That's what's causing problems. Boris boy, get your Maggie Thatcher book out on quick fixes, sort yourself out, and the rest of your team, because it's not doing any good.
I think,
and I'm sure he's listening now over his toast and marmalade. So there'll be a response, I expect,
to many governments around the world. I mean, not just the UK. I think there are many examples. You know, the UK government was slow to act for sure. And that I think allowed cases to rise quicker than they ordinarily should have done, exponentially rather than kind of progressively. I think the same can be applied to many other environments. What I would say also is the governments were quick to use the link to we're following the science when it suited them.
It's always a great caveat.
The science would now dictate, of course, that other action should be taken. The economic decline should dictate that other actions should be taken. Then, if I had a very good quote in the week, it was by Tony Abbott, who's making a speech at the Policy Exchange in London. Tony Abbott, for those that don't know, is the former Prime Minister of Australia, a bit of a Marmite fella, or as the Aussies would use, Vegemite, and. He was there talking about, a large number of points about, bilateral relations and foreign trade, etc. But what he also stated was kind of saying, look, from a health perspective, the pandemic has been serious. From an economic perspective, the pandemic has been disastrous. But from a well-being perspective, it will turn out worst of all. And he then went on to draw a parallel to saying, I wonder how generations before us or generations to come will judge this generation, because our previous generations were ready to risk life to preserve freedoms. This generation seems ready to risk freedoms to preserve life.
Oh, Stephen, that's going to be a topical discussion around many a table now. If anybody's listening to this,
I'm quoting Tony Abbott. I don't always agree with everything Tony Abbott says, but I did think there's something poignant there, Chris, that sort of said, look, if we have come, to the top of, we've climaxed, if you like, if we have,
But that's a bit strong language for 7 o'clock in the morning, my friend.
Sorry. Well, if we reach the top of the impact of this pandemic, and who knows what the second wave might look like in full when that reaches again. But if we haven't, we're coming down the other side. We're sliding down the other side. Surely there are other actions that mean we can start to get people back traveling and we can start to open up the economy again. I think that's what Abbott is referring to. He's not saying, look, the government shouldn't have taken actions as they did to close down and really try to hammer down this the spread of this disease. I think what we should all be saying is, are those actions sustainable for the long term? Can we keep borders closed for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years? I don't think so, personally. I think what people are going to be is more conscious, more conscious of the impact of sanitization, good sanitization standards, etc., and go about our business as we tried to do, or we did before, in its most best possible way. So, sorry, I'm not trying to be controversial, because I'm just saying that was something that resonated with me, and it got me thinking about how others will judge us and our actions.
Yeah. I don't think it'll be very favourably when they look back. But also, to be fair to the younger generation, and also it's dangerous now the way media is sort of dividing the two. But for the younger generation, they want to celebrate things, and they want to get out and they want to live their life, which is fair enough. And I think if people, or if governments, if organisations gave a little bit more solid clarity in regards to their instructions and their directions, there could be a little bit of a balance, so that you didn't see people just thinking, right, I'm going to be a rebel and I'm going to go against it and I don't care and I'm going to sit there with my friends, etc. There could be a fine balance to help people do the things that they want to do, that they need to do and that they should be doing, but also making them a little bit more responsible. But while everybody doesn't give clarity as to what's necessary, that's where it all falls down.
Well, I'll just say that very quickly in response to that. I know you want to move on, but we in Malaysia, we all wear a mask. And I have every freedom excuse me, I have every freedom available to me here by wearing a mask. I can go to the shops, I can go to restaurants, I can go to the cinema, I can go on an airplane, I can go on holiday, I can go to the beach, I can go to the swimming pool. And all I've got to do is make sure I'm wearing a mask outside. That isn't very much to ask. So for those that question the impact of the freedoms or the human rights by wearing a mask, I've got zero sympathy. Because actually, you'll find that you will gain more freedoms than you will be losing from wearing a mask.
Yeah. And coming back now, you said about quarantine. Quarantine is fine if people have actually contracted and they know they've got it. But we've got to everybody start now doing the testing, and all these fancy sayings, save lives, etc. Of course, and when you see the documentaries now that have been made by the medical staff of what they experienced during the worst time, it was horrendous, and I don't think anybody can even comment on it unless they were there. So to make sure that doesn't come back, certain things have to be done. But I think, coming back now to a little catchy saying, they should be doing it. It's chase it, catch it, kill it, and not all this faffing around and doing administration, because this quarantine business now, if nobody tests it, nobody chases it, and there's enough whistleblowers saying that they haven't been used and it's not effective. And all that baloney about world beating and Mr. Hancock, it's rubbish. They've got to sort this out now. So again, chase it, catch it, kill it, and go after it with a vengeance to make sure that it gets resolved as quickly as possible. Now, India, Steve, another 80 plus for 3-4 consecutive days. Now that is alarming, but it's not surprising because of the population, how many people live together, etc. So one of the things that's going to have to happen now as we move forward and towards vaccines, there was mentioned now that the Russian vaccine actually does work, but it's on a very small, I think it was only about 70 or 80 or less than 100 people. Now it's going into a second phase of about 40,000, which is the same as the Oxford vaccine. So that's good news that's coming. But one of the things that I've been talking to with a lot of people now is about the preparation and the organisation of the vaccine production and distribution. And we've been talking about CEIV, GDP, and we've been talking about airports taking a more leading role to identify what their capabilities would be so that anybody above, so if there's going to be a vaccine commission or champion group or whatever, so they know exactly what the capabilities logistically wise are in each location or each country. Now, it would surprise me if that's already started in discussion, but I certainly hope it has done, because the same problems with the distribution and storage of the PPE, we don't want that to now happen with vaccines. So again, there needs to be a coming together and a collaboration. And one of the subject matters that we're talking about is these representative bodies who have all been doing a good job. They have to proportionately equalize their organizations the same as the industry that they're supporting. So they are now losing people and they are losing expertise. So one of the best things to do when that happens is you bring all of those groups together, you pool their resources, you have a single directive that helps the industry, and that would then come across logical to everybody within the industry. What do you think?
I think, well, as long as there's not mass distribution of the same vaccine that Alexei Navalny appears to have been administered from Russian state, I think let's be open-minded. I guess I was quite close to that previously, but just shortly afterwards, Navalny obviously was taking a hit, so speedy recovery to him. Chris, I guess. I think we touched on this a couple of weeks ago, where we sort of said, look, maybe the size and scale of a global vaccine and the distribution and the logistics, management of that, particularly around the last mile, is particularly challenging. Yeah. And when you think about, I was listening to, I will come back to answer your point, but just as a sort of a context, I was listening to a podcast a couple of days ago with Tony Blair, former UK Prime Minister, again, another Marmite character. Yeah. And I have to say, in a long time, I've disagreed with Tony Blair because of his stance on Europe. But here I agreed with him 100%, and it was all about testing. Yeah. The Tony Blair Institute, while it's been doing a lot of work on testing capability for commercial purposes and supporting commercial, and particularly around aviation, he spoke specifically about John Holland Kane, Heathrow and testing and trying to help get the UK aviation industry started. He also touched on, Chris, the challenges associated with countries in Africa, for example, third world nations or impoverished nations, with less than scrupulous governments that have not been able to lock down for all sorts of reasons. Yeah. It's akin to what you mentioned in India. People, 3, 4, 5 generations, are living in the same household. That's very common in that part of the world. It's not so common, for us, Caucasians necessarily, but it is in places like India, Africa, and others. And therefore, the challenge that Mr. Blair was representing or alluding to was, how does one kind of get successful? All very well the world putting in $20 billion, $30 billion into vaccination programs, but does that mean that the top 10, top 20, most wealthy nations will get first dibs, as has been the case in the US? They're trying to command the rights on the Oxford vaccine, which bloody cheek, being produced in the UK, but the US is trying to get first dibs. Actually, should the UK get first dibs because it's been produced in the UK? I don't know. I don't think necessarily that's the answer. I think, therefore, what we've got to challenge is not just the logistics and the last mile problem itself, but actually just getting vaccines to people that need it most. And that doesn't just mean those with comorbidities or those in the high risk groups. It also means getting it down into rural villages in Malawi or Nigeria places that our industry, Chris, has not been able to get vaccines like polio to for decades. So I'm slightly skeptical that the US CDC was saying, we're ready for the logistics challenge of delivering these vaccines. Well, from the west coast to the east is 5 hours, my friend, on an airplane. It ain't all that difficult. Even to some of those very rural redneck communities that we know exist in the US, it isn't that difficult. What is difficult actually is getting it to places that matter. And what matters most is that we, as a world of something I question humanity, but a world of people that should be looking after those that can look after themselves, should be catering to look after others. And that's where getting these vaccines to places that matter most is. I certainly would consider a vaccine, but if it meant me taking a vaccine over somebody else, I would not. Somebody else that needed it, because I'm accepting of the risk of COVID for myself. That, of course, the issue then is the cross transmission. So I think the logistics is going to do two things. One is, it's all very well to gear up, and there's lots of belly capacity, there's lots of cabin capacity, because even low cost carriers are taking seats out. I saw the other day, I can't remember which carrier it was, but I think it might have been Indigo. It could have been. It took out the seats out one of the 320s. Lots of capacity to move things around. Cold chain environment is important potentially as well. But the second thing then is the last mile, Chris. And the last mile is really important. And this is where now I'd like to see a lot of the effort, instead of all this negativity and bullshit, and start focusing on it. WHO, other bodies now should start working on what is the strategy, what are the tactics, whether they bring drone development into this, like you said, for the remote areas.
how do they do it, what sort of priorities are going to be there, so that everybody have a better understanding of how it's going to happen. And then when it happens, stop then having all this, well, it didn't work and we told you so. There should be a lot more preparation now, and it should be a lot stronger, because so frustrating not to hear enough.
I agree, and I think, you know, there are still some governments out there that think that they can eradicate, you know, COVID-19, and all the medical experts, of which I'm not one, just to be clear. All the reports I've read, and things like the Lancet or the Economist, and, you know, decent journals have said that is you know, not a realistic expectation. But governments are still holding firm on that. I think what that means is, Chris, that we have to apply the vaccine really to those, see with, you know, a critical lens, those that have died from this illness. And when you, without sounding morbid, if I was unlucky enough to suffer a very rare form of cancer or whatever, I needed a very unique drug that could cost a health service hundreds of thousands of pounds. Yeah. That goes through a system of calibration, a system of value for return.
Just like investment. Any other calculation.
Any other drug. And the health service will often deny me that drug, because they say you might only get 3 useful years of life out of that drug, and it's going to cost us £500,000 a year. Yep. So they wouldn't do it. So for those that are in, I'm sorry, I don't want to sound morbid, but for those that are, you know, octogenarians and above, how many years useful life could they get from a vaccine? How often would they continue to have to be vaccinated? What is the half-life of that kind of or the inoculation period of the vaccine, etc. So there has to be all that discussion as well before we just start plowing money into a bottomless pit.
Yeah, no, agreed. Right, let's move on from that one. Now, Ryanair. Okay, again, a very strong message about the number of jobs in Ireland that will go if things don't sort themselves out. You know, 140,000 quoted in aviation, and then in tourism another 325. I mean, the numbers that are coming out now everywhere, Steve, are terrible, and there's very little positivity even now. And the liquidity solutions, they're still now talking about having to lay off a lot more people. So the next 6 or 7 months are going to be very, very tough for everybody across all industries, but especially aviation and tourism. Yeah, and again, comes back again to testing, Steve.
Yeah. I saw also this week, Chris, Donata in Singapore adding to the list in Singapore previously of SATs that had announced a whole-scale redundancy program. 2,500 jobs at Qantas from ground handling outsourcing. Arguably, some others will be absorbed by the likely the companies that pick up that work. Virgin Atlantic, 1,200 jobs, although they did secure their I don't know what the technical term is, but they secured their future, if you like. They said their £1.2 billion program. I don't know if that's going to be enough for a small, you know, squeezed carrier like Virgin in a market that becomes all the more competitive now, but we'll still see. Yeah. Swissport managed to secure some terms this week for the liquidity, so that's certainly good news for Swissport. But Chris, this just goes on and on and on. I think you know, it now we are at the peril of our governments and bilateral relations, and these discussions are going to happen. They're going to happen quickly. We are at the risk of, you know, ignoring the capability in front of us that the industry all sees that governments are blind to, which is test, and you know, you could just see this that pent up demand that had been created during lockdown, because the minute that people were allowed out, they were booking holidays. Exactly. Going into restaurants, going into pubs, going into, you know, getting flights, traveling around Europe. Fantastic. Even I would say as a cynic, you know, when the government were paying for half your meal, people suddenly said, "Oh, it's a bit scary to go to a restaurant." But the minute the government paid, "Oh, we can all suddenly go to a restaurant again! Yay! There's no more risk of the virus because the government paid my bill." I mean, come on. So there has been a lot of, I would say, sort of woe is me around some of that. But you can see really the positivity of people all across the world who want to travel. And I think, Chris, when this opens up, when these buffoons, these mutton heads, or in government all around, and not just government, but bureaucrats as well. Civil service are just as bad as the politicians. When these mutton heads finally get their heads together and work, you know, collaboratively, constructively, and bilaterally, I think actually what we'll see is, based on that small anecdotal sort of resurgence, some pretty good resurgence, certainly in the leisure and VFR markets that have been suppressed longer. Business and corporate travel, I think, is still a bit further down the track.
Yeah. And talking about the Daily Mail, they also had a feature about private aviation as well, which is also doing very well because of the reduction in the touch points and the speed and not having to hang around. So I think people's awareness, Steve, is going to be a lot higher, which is why there needs to be consistency. And I've got to say, every single person that myself and Salem have spoken to with regards to the digital event that's coming up on the 21st, 22nd, 23rd, or 22nd, 23rd, 24th of September, I've got to say, we did them in teams. So 2 airports, 2 GHAs, 2 carriers. Everybody was so positive, so collaborative, so supportive. That's the sort of information and news that needs to go out. And even in times where the liquidity can be achieved, and then there's still announcements of further reductions, part of getting that liquidity or that financial support is that you have to streamline your business because of practical sizing, because of the reduction in supply. So if people were educated and made more aware of the positives, I think there'd be a much different approach to everything that's going to happen. And like you said, as soon as there is an opening, people will jump at it because they want to live their lives. They want to enjoy what they're doing.
And therefore, I really hope, Chris. I mean, there were some airlines that vastly needed to transform before this crisis came along.
Yeah.
But there are those that have generally been caught up in the crossfire of ineffective government and lack of conviction around what the solutions are to restoring travel confidence. And I think those are the ones, so the Ryanairs or the EasyJets, the Qantases, etc. of the world. I think those are the ones, particularly, Chris, that will start to rebuild, and hopefully those that were affected and those that are being made redundant. We keep talking about this sort of connection. That the firm has to keep maintain with the employee, and I hope that I can only hope that has been really sort of embraced by businesses that have lost people, such that when this uptick does come, and even if it means things like seasonal contract or back onto for one zero hours contracts. I know that's not a friendly term, but you know what I mean, sort of a casual hours, etc. I think all of those opportunities should exist for those exposed. I did see some great news in the week that the Qatar Airways contract had been taken at London. Had been taken over by Menzies. I did see the move to the Horseshoe. Always gives me terrible sort of memories of that facility, Chris, as you will remember fondly yourself.
I remember that specific one because I was involved with Des Fatanis when he was there to get Lufthansa exclusivity in that particular facility. Right, So I think poor old Phil will be saying goodbye with one arm, and then you got John and Mervyn saying hello with the other for Qatar.
But it's great to see some new employees going into that group. Yeah, exactly. So that
it's good news. Yeah. And the same as you were saying earlier with Emirates now making the announcements of returning to certain, should we say, normality in October. So that's a positive.
Yeah, that was interesting. I mean, I do wonder how this will be funded, but then I don't necessarily need to worry about that terribly much. I'm sure the shareholder and the government of Dubai as the sole shareholder will see them through. But they made a commitment to return their employees to full pay from October. So obviously they've been stepped down, and Emirates also, I think, were very clear at the beginning that those at the top of the tree will take the biggest hit in terms of the step down, and those at the bottom will take less of a hit. That's really fair, and it's great to see that Emirates are committed to restore that. What that means for restoring travel and restoring the network and frequencies, though, I don't yet know, Chris, and hasn't yet become clear. But clearly, Emirates with that public commitment they made this week are hoping for some more green shoots in the weeks and months to come.
Well, I think the message, like you said, Steve, it's also a positive message to all the senior management who did take the hit, because at certain levels there was no pay. Then it was 50, then it was 25, etc. And the guys who did the hard work at the bottom, they weren't affected. So I think it's a thank you now as well as anything else, which is good. Now, obviously, if Joseph is listening out there, there's been a bit of a Wizz Air withdrawal over the last few weeks, but look what they've done again now. They're coming back with positive messages everywhere and new routes. I mean, they've really are using the positivity in their marketing. So, Joseph,
Well,
if you or any of your marketing team are listening, we would expect, at the very least, within the next couple of weeks, a couple of baseball caps and t-shirts.
Chris, I think, look, Wizz Air is a standout for me throughout this. We said this in week 2 or 3.
Yeah.
You know, it was a bit like the sort of the, you know, I wouldn't draw any real parallels between Qatar Airways and Wizz Air. I think Wizz Air is excellent, very strong leadership. Qatar Airways arguably has the same. But the difference is that that Wizz Air has extremely strong discipline when it comes to their cost model, to their business model. They know what works and what doesn't work. They've got a single fleet, single kind of modus operandi, and that works really well. They've been particularly strong in the in the Central Eastern Europe, you know, VFR and leisure travel markets. I think it just goes to show what can be done when you don't take your eye off the ball. And actually, you've maintained that conviction throughout. You know, when Wizz Air probably started around 2004 or something around then, 5 maybe, something around that. I seem to remember. One of our listeners will correct me, I'm sure. But you know, for a long time, because they've been very, very strong and disciplined. And it just goes to show what can be achieved when compare that to carriers like EasyJet that once were very disciplined and took their eye off the ball. The cost base increased, their employees increased, they kind of, you know, scattered all over the place. And then came kind of unstuck when it comes down to liquidity and cash, and their cost base probably needs to be addressed before this, but certainly will be being addressed now. So well done to Wizz Air. I think great news to see their first aircraft being delivered into the Abu Dhabi operations, some more expansion from Milan, the Gatwick stuff we saw a couple of weeks ago. So yeah, well done, Joseph and team.
Yeah, no, well done. And some other positives, Steve. I was lucky enough to moderate the Dubai Airport show during the week. And there were organisations on there that had innovative projects, programs, platforms, etc. Some really, really good ones. There was a few there that were, you know, they monitor the capacity in a facility. They give early forecasts, you know, and then when there's scheduling disruption like there is at the moment, and ghost flights and such short-term changes, all of that was in place. There was discussions about airport pooling of various equipment and different models. It was very, very, very positive. The only thing that could better it is if that awareness was now communicated to so many people so they could see exactly what was happening. It would then bolster the confidence for people to fly again.
Yeah, absolutely, I agree.
So, my friend, I think unless there's anything else that you'd like to add, can I ask you what is the reason for the shirt this week? I mean, it's lovely to see. Always a pleasure to see the Three Lions.
England dropped Pakistan in the test in England this week. So yeah.
So you're giving another message, huh?
Yeah. Go on, England.
Go on, England. Right. So Boris and the boys, chase it, catch it, kill it. Stop faffing around and start being more clear in your directions, and everywhere else as well. WHO, start doing something now about the vaccine organisation and structure. Anything else, Steve?
All good for me, Chris. Look forward to seeing you next week. Another busy week coming up. I think there's a lot happening for sure. Let's hope that we've got some more positive momentum, or we find some positive momentum next week.
Yeah.
But sure, I look forward to seeing you next Saturday.
Yeah. And to everybody who is having their positions threatened or displaced, you know, sympathies and support goes out, and then please God, within a very short period of time, you'll be invited back into the aviation industry.
Indeed, absolutely.
We'll miss you, and good luck to everybody. All right. Thanks very much, Steve.
Cheers, Chris.
Take care, mate. See you next week. Who knows where, but we know when. It'll be a Saturday.